Welcome to this very interesting webinar. With you, I'm the moderator. My name is Ram. I'm a senior partner with Cedar and IBS Intelligence. IBS Intelligence is the host for this webinar, and we actually are running this along with Hexaware, in whose offices I am this beautiful studio that I'm sitting here with. With me, to my right, is Scott duFour. Scott is the global CIO of FleetCor. As we all know, FleetCor is a global provider for commercial payment solutions. Scott manages IT operations across North America, Latin America, Europe, and Australasia. And I think more importantly, I understand, Scott, you started your career with Accenture.
I did.
And it's always wonderful to have a fellow consultant in the panel. So thank you there. And I know you've been leading technology positions, leadership positions with many other organizations before you came on to FleetCor with McKesson, and where I guess you were leading around 13 plus countries, if I'm not wrong. And of course with Ingram Micro as well. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Scott, pleasure. And I would also like to welcome my other colleague here to my left, Ravishankar, whom I know for a long time. Ravi is the global head for banking practice at Hexaware. His claim to fame, firstly, he's a veteran with 25 plus years of experience, has managed programs, IT programs, and business transformation programs in about 13 plus countries again. But more importantly, I think, with Ravi, he never ceases to surprise. He keeps getting certified every 6 months with something or the other. The last time I actually met him, he had got himself recertified on cloud and as a cloud architect, and more recently he has got himself a Snow Pro Core certification. Now I don't know if every time I meet you, you got another certificate. So Ravi, I'm always in awe with you. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
With us, joining from UK, we have Teresa Corners. Teresa is the managing director for Payment Matters. She is an ambassador to the Payments Association, where she actually advocates that payments matter, and she is the MD for Payment Matters. She is also formerly the director for market engagement for international banking at RBS. More importantly, she is a contributing author to some of the most interesting books that actually have been published in the payment space, including the PayTech book and Market's Leading World Payments Report. I didn't know, Teresa, till I actually looked up on your profile to know that you actually are the EMEA Advisory Board member for Women in Payments. So that's indeed interesting, and we do have women in this payment conference as well. So thank you again for joining us, Teresa, from 10,000 miles away in the UK. With that, I would jump quickly into this very interesting panel discussion or roundtable, as whatever we want to call it. The topic today's discussion is on payments core transformation, right? And I think, in fact, when we actually had picked this topic, there were a few very interesting questions that came our way, saying, what are we talking about? And, this is a bit run-of-the-mill payments transformation. There are a lot of people doing it. So what's new about it? What's surprising? And what's interesting about it? And what I figured was, I think there was a catch to this payments core transformation, that every single transformation program you see around you either is actually getting longer than you anticipated it to be, or costlier than what you had planned it to be. And here we had someone like Ravi telling me that, look, I challenge you that I could actually execute something, 10x faster and 4x cheaper. I said, look, if that's what you want to tell me, let's actually have this told to the world and not just to me. And that's what the origin of this discussion was. And here we are. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us from around the world. I know we have a lot of people out there who have joined from different time zones. We hope to keep this interesting for you, so that we actually don't have to bore you only with our talk, and so that we also engage our audience. I would actually be having my admin who's on the call here, Nikhil, to actually be running some polls for me, and he would be announcing the results of the poll as well for all of us, so we all keep ourselves engaged. And these polls, we do want audience to actually have their fastest fingers ready, and it also sets the tone for the discussion that we're having today. So with that, if I may take everyone's permission to start with the first poll. So we start with the audience before we start internally. So Nikhil, if you don't mind, if you can run poll question 1, please. And let me know when you have run it, because I can't see it on the screen here.
Yes, the poll question first is on people's screens.
Okay.
The question is, should I read out the question, sir?
I'm assuming it's about the biggest factor that tends to slow down the execution of transformation programs. Is that right?
Yes.
Brilliant. So we do have some interesting options here, Scott and Ravi. We have, what's the biggest factor that tends to slow down the execution of a transformation program? A, ensuring stakeholder alignment. B, engaging with multiple third-party service providers. C, adapting to new age technology. And D, driving the rollout to scale, right? So it's about stakeholder alignment or third-party service provider engagement or new age technology adoption or ensuring that we are rolling out to scale. Unfortunately, all of the above is not a choice.
Yes,
Okay, so we do want to see what the audience have to say on what, I'm sure there are different perspectives to these and from different people.
yes.
We'll give another 30 seconds for the audience to choose. But before they did that, I would encourage my fellow panelists here to have their own point of view crystallized as well.
Sure, I can go first. So whatever payments transformation that we've seen from a SI perspective, there are two major things. Can I choose? Basically, driving the rollout to scale and stakeholder alignment, not in any particular order. These are the two levers.
But you have to pick only one.
If that is the case, then it's stakeholder alignment.
Stakeholder alignment is Ravi's pick. Before I come to Scott, Teresa, would you have a pick?
Well, I wanted to as well. So this is very tricky. So I deal with, I'm an NED and advisor as well, and I deal with a lot of smaller companies, people that aren't the size of Hexaware and FleetCor and would love to be as big as you. So for me, there's something about driving the rollout to scale if I have the lens of a smaller fintech. However, if you're pushing me to choose one, then I'm with Ravi, actually. I do think it's the stakeholder alignment, because sometimes it's like herding cats. So I think that's terribly important.
Very interesting. And your pick would be?
Well, I'll pick the second one that they weren't going to, right? Just so we make it a more interesting discussion. I will go with the scaling to alignment. And the one since it wasn't on the list, I get opportunity to add. I think also, say stakeholder alignment, there's also patience, right? Back to this takes a long time. I think people, it's almost like the hype curve. People get very excited at the beginning of transformation. You very quickly, as you run into some of your normal challenges, get into kind of that valley of despair. And keeping people through that is, I think that's probably, you say stakeholder alignment, but I'd say stakeholder patience with you.
Fascinating.
Right? So I'd say that's one as
well. That's what your pick would be. And let's hear Nikhil read out what the audience poll results are. Nikhil?
The top rank goes to the third option, which is adapting to new age technology. Coming in at second is enduring stakeholder alignment, which is the first option. And the third option is engaging multiple third-party service providers.
Thank you. Thank you. And if I may ask you, what's the percentage distribution amongst them?
The first one is a clear first with 34%. The second and third are each at 29 and 27%.
Oh, that's pretty close. That's not far away. Well, I mean, that sets the tone, if I may, actually, for this discussion. And I'm going to start with you, Scott. And if I was to go back to, since there is a discussion around new age technology, and I know Ron Clark, your CEO, once famously quoted that you got to work smart and not hard.
Yeah.
And I guess any transformation is about taking a perspective of not of an acquirer, but of an aggregator, right? Where you are actually making sure that you are leveraging smart technology through what we call as context at scale. So alignment to stakeholders is all about immersive governance, right? And it's also about being a factor to driving fast track execution, right? So going back to your comment about alignment of stakeholders, but more importantly, ensuring that you are keeping the larger context. How would you react to what could be a driver or a factor that makes sure that you actually are keeping on track from a timeline standpoint?
Yeah, that's keeping on track from a timeline standpoint. It's always a tricky question. That's tied to funding. That's tied to other variables that come in, and we're a very acquisitive company. So our priorities, we have to remain very agile, right, in terms of what we need to do. So that timeline gets very tricky for us. Managing that expectation as we move through some of those challenges, from whether it be a funding, but a priority standpoint, is probably one of our biggest issues. I'd say the other one is aligning, and I'll change the answer a little bit, but the value statement, right? Because I think every transformation program has a different objective in terms of what's the value, whether it be operational, security, agility, and keep people aligned on why are we doing this, and keeping them focused on the value statement too, is probably the other challenge, sometimes even more so than just the timing. Right? Because if they start to say, well, I'm not getting the value, remember the value was at the end of the transformation, it's all along the journey, and keeping them aligned on where they're going to see that value, I think can help them keep patient with the changing timeline, given some of the other priorities that can come up.
That's interesting. So it's not just about aligning, but about ensuring that the value statement
doesn't change, is remembered.
It's reiterated. Yeah.
People get into the heart of a program, get focused on things like time, get focused on things like budget, and they forget the things on why we're doing it.
Missing the woods for the trees.
That's right.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. And I want to, before I come to you, Teresa, I'm going to actually go to Ravi. And there is actually a, context here, Ravi. I mean, one is about doing a program. It's another to actually be doing a large scale, what you would call as a legacy platform getting transformed. And I know you always like to quote it as changing engines in a moving car, right? I mean, that's now the challenge in doing any of this is, you actually have to make sure that you aren't disturbing status quo, even while you are actually building the way forward. So what, in your view, would be the levers that can help accelerate the moving car even while you're changing those engines?
Thank you for asking, because if this was the case about 10 years ago, I would have said, Ram, what are you smoking? That would not have been a reality. It was there in people's PowerPoints, but it was very difficult to translate into reality. But today's technology with AI and ML, and the ability to have a hot backup and the ability to think real can actually make it happen. I'll make it very simple, right? Back in the day, when we were moving a legacy platform out into a so-called modern platform, we had to understand what it does internally, everything, and then rebuild it from scratch. Today, the options are, yes, you can rebuild it very fast, very, very quickly, but there are many composable elements available. The Lego blocks, prefabricated Lego blocks are available in the form of platforms provided by fintechs, products which are very tailorable, and also they interact with everything else in the open API situation. So a lot more options come to the fore from a solutioning standpoint. And as Scott mentioned, right, while you're doing this, you should not forget why you're doing what you're doing. Now, we were just having a discussion before this that while we transform and everything, what is the end objective? What's the business getting out of it? What's the value we are creating? So that's the thing that you have to remember. But yes, times have changed. Technology has matured. Technology has moved out from PowerPoints into real life. We can really now accelerate the car while the engine is on, but without forgetting why we are doing what we're doing.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to take that statement to Teresa. Why are we doing what we are doing before we get to how we are doing it, right? So I guess the why question comes first before the what and then the how. So I guess, Teresa, you've been on the business side of things, looking at, ultimately, why we are doing it, keeping the customer in mind. And and you've also been engaging with the market so extensively, and we all know there's so many moving parts and changing expectations all the time. One of the things that, in the last time you and I spoke, we were talking about, a program is meant for a business benefit, not an IT output. And it was a profound statement there. So how do you ensure that you are driving alignment with A, market demands, and B, the resulting expectations, and C, ensuring the transformation journey is still effectively delivering what it is meant to do? So how do you draw that balance in your view?
And I think for me, your word alignment in the first part of that question is really key, because as we know, transformation journeys, they should benefit the business and the customer. And mine, as you say, is very much a customer lens. And for that to happen, you have to have the voice of the customer. It has to be center stage, or else frankly, you won't see the wood for the trees. And there comes inflection points, right, or I feel there do, when it comes to transformation journeys, because you do have times, and I'm conscious of the roles that my fellow panelists do as I say this, but there have been times in my experience where a tech team has taken a decision without the involvement of the business lead, and unwittingly, that tech decision has impacted the customer proposition. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that that the business lead should be involved in every single tech decision. That's madness. That's the road to ruin. But we're reliant upon tech teams to recognise those inflection points, anything that will materially impact the proposition. Because then going back to the piece you were saying about value statements, and Scott, I wrote it down when you say when we're in the valley of despair, when you're very much in that kind of that space, it's just kind of, what are we trying to achieve here? Will it impact the outcome? So there's that alignment. From a UK perspective as well, the voice of customer is very much coming to the fore from a regulatory point of view as much as anything else. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, are introducing something called consumer duty. And consumer duty is pervasive across the firm to put the customer at the heart of the business. It is not just a compliant exercise. It's outcome-based. There are cross-cutting rules that go across the business, and act in good faith, avoid foreseeable harm. So some of those inflection points, and also just make sure that customers can make informed decisions. But what they will be assessing, crucially for this conversation as well, first of all, there's things like fair value. Customers are getting fair value for the price they're paying. They're getting appropriate information. But for this conversation, in the UK from July this year, the end of July, they will be measured and assessed as to, are customers getting a good service and got high levels of satisfaction? And the technology stack really has a very important part to play there. And from a product and services point of view, the FCA will come in and they'll say, are you designing products and services that actually really meet customer needs? And that throughout your whole transformation journeys, your technology stacks that you're building, can you prove that you've considered that? Because many firms will say to me, Teresa, we do that, we're great, we do all of that. Well, that's great, but crucially, you have to monitor it and you have to evidence it, going forward here. So back to your question, it's never been as important to align that business benefit of the customer proposition with the IT output.
Lovely. I think number of points you made there, Teresa. The first is the voice of customer. I think, unless we're all hearing it loud and clear, it could be an internal customer or an external customer. End of the day, it's important to recognize what the customer, he or she, is seeking. And that seeking is also changing on a dynamic basis because the market is changing around you. So you got to keep pace with that as well. But I think you made a very interesting point about monitoring and evidencing the benefits that a customer is getting, right? And that's a very powerful statement, because what that means is it's not enough to actually be monitoring and quantifying it, but constantly reminding the customer of the value that is being delivered through this program. And that basically means, and if I was to take this back to you, Scott, and when you actually are driving a transformation program, there are so many, what do you call as stakeholders, right? I mean, there are business owners, there are third-party service providers, there are partners, there are technology players. And it's a symbiotic relationship that actually is critical to drive there, right? I mean, end of the day, and if I wear the cost reduction hat, I mean, moving from a time to a cost factor, clearly the cost driver or the factor that brings your cost down is when you are being able to leverage your the cross pollination across various factors, right? Now, you made a statement last time saying that you got to keep reiterating why we are doing as a business vision repeatedly to all stakeholders and get them all on a singular plane, right? And how does one really do that? I mean, is it practically, I mean, is it a utopian statement that we all get them to align, or are there really some tricks of the trade that you want to share with us?
No, I'd say it's interesting. The act is obviously the why we're doing something, the value statement can act as guardrails to many decisions you have to make in a program, right? And the why we're doing it and the guardrails are different for different people. So when you're talking to the business folks, it's a way to manage scope, right? In terms of why are we doing this? Hey, does that really add to this value case? It's a way to manage scope. So when you're managing those stakeholders, it's a way of containing scope. When you're working with the technology providers, be it internal or external, it's also a way for them as they're solutioning to focus on, well, that's not as important, right? I don't need as an elegant of a solution here otherwise. So you're doing it for different reasons to different groups. At least that's what I find. But often it acts as guardrails for the decisions that those individuals have to make as part of the overall team.
That's interesting. So you're telling me that it's not necessary. There is one overarching objective, but if you peel it down, there are different objectives or sub-objectives, should I say, for different audiences.
Yes.
How does one actually keep the audience aligned with those sub-objectives and the larger objective?
Yeah, I think you have different type of governance meetings with different types of groups, whether it's your steering committee meetings with the business stakeholders and the key IT people. So generally, you're going to reiterate at the beginning of the meeting, hey, here's our kind of mission statement. Here's why we're doing it. Now let's go into the status and everything else and the open issues and everything else. Conversely, when you're working with the teams doing the actual development work or the transformation work, you're going to go through a similar process with them. So I think it's always making sure you have your right. I don't say it's a marketing exercise, but you've got to start every meeting and reiterate everything with why we're doing this.
Why not? It is a marketing exercise.
It is. It's a very big marketing exercise.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that's a very important takeaway for us, right? I mean, so you got to have an element of marketing, when you're doing for the right reasons, and it's a positive connotation here that you got to reiterate the message and get people aligned with what they're getting and how often they're getting it and in what frequency. And I'll probably circle back on this, and that goes back to the waterfall and agile and big bang and everything. But and I do have to ask, maybe I'll go to you with that question, Teresa. We actually tend to, there's always this balance between the immediate need and the pot of gold at the end of the journey, right? And there's always this trade-off. I mean, you all the time are conflicted between what do I prioritize? Because if I focus on that, that end goal, then I get to compromise on a lot of short-term needs and people's interest levels, kind of go down. If you had to be addressing their short-term aspirations and you get distracted along the way, that you, as you said, you tend to forget why you are here in the first place. So it becomes a bit of a tightrope walk there, isn't it?
It does.
So if I may phrase the question, how do you balance between managing the journey and managing the outcome?
And you're right, because they are different things, but they're parallel and often dependent. And for me, I much prefer an agile phased approach, because that way, when phase one comes through, if the market has moved on or the business needs have moved on, I feel that other phrases can be flexed. Now, Scott, I promise I'm not picking on you, but you said something in amongst that like the scope word, right? And that there's something that kind of says, if I then kind of said, well, regulation has changed or something else, so therefore I think the scope might need to move. I would often have conversations with guys like yourselves to go, well, it's kind of moved a bit, and you'll go, well, no, Teresa, you signed off this scope and your initial requirements were, X, Y, Z. And I get it. I do get it. But, as you say, it is a balance. You also mentioned in a previous conversation marketing. Now, that's the other reason why I like the agile approach with phased delivery, because out in the market with our end customers, whoever they're, they're consumers or corporates, whatever they are, I much prefer to have content-led sort of pieces of marketing going in saying new enhancements, new functionality, efficiency, whatever it is, lovely new data that you can do stuff with. I prefer that consistency rather than a big bang approach, because it's a really powerful customer engagement tool, and that of course leads to revenue. So there's many reasons why the balance is necessary, but I prefer agile rather than big bang.
And that's, I guess you've been very clear about that view. And if I just stay on that for a second, so I think you talked about changing market dynamics, right? And the demands of the market, and it could be driven by the regulator or it could be driven by, market changing dynamics. And you've seen this in your previous experiences that sometimes it also becomes important to actually highlight and repeatedly highlight the benefit that the customer has received, because it may actually be, people may, get to ignore it or undervalue it, if not quote unquote market it. Would you agree?
I would completely agree. And we've used the word value a lot in this conversation. And I completely and utterly think it is about that. But there is something too about taking stuff for granted. Sometimes, often, we will deliver something technologically that is really, really, far-reaching and astounding. And we might not recognize actually the benefit that it has to an end customer and the value that it is producing. And there is no harm in reminding our end customers of that. And therefore, invigorating our brand, customer loyalty and everything else. But when it comes to, you also mentioned prioritization. Clearly, I'm going to go for, as a business lead, I'm going to go for the regulatory angle, because I don't want to be up in court with the senior managers regime or whatever. So I'm going to go for that first and foremost, and then of course covered by revenue, and then sort of other enhancements. So yeah, and I think with that, myself and my technology companies colleagues are very aligned.
The piece here is about having a technology orientation there, and I have a technologist to my left here, and I'm going to go to you, Ravi. You see, in any program, and especially large transformation programs, there are easy bits and there are, small pebbles and large boulders, right?
Yeah.
Now, one angle or one dimension to looking at the program is looking at what's short-term benefits and long-term benefits or impact, right? But that's a business perspective. A technologist perspective is about getting the easy things done first, or is it getting the difficult things done first, right? My son actually is appearing for his public exams, and this debate always goes on at home. I mean, you're having a question paper, do I attempt the easy questions first or the difficult questions first, right? So what would you pick, and what would you advise our audience here as well?
See, in a large transformation program, there are several risks. It could be execution risk, it could be foundational risks, and behavioral risks. So when you look at it from that lens, right, and look at it overall, what we call as the quick wins, right, that is the table stakes. You got to do establish credential, keep the confidence alive all the time. As Scott was saying, right, every meeting is a marketing exercise. So you go and you publish and republish that we've achieved this, we've achieved this. So that actually builds the confidence amongst the people. And then you mix it up with a varying degree of confidence. So the big rocks becomes easier to lift, the boulders become easier to lift because the confidence of the team is slightly higher. There is buoyancy, upward buoyancy in the mindset of the people. And that actually carries them through, because it's all about momentum and people. In large transformation program, the technical bit is very, very less. It's all about mindset, momentum, and the kind of teams that you have.
That's 3M. Your mindset, momentum,
And the teams.
and,
The teams, yeah.
and manpower.
Oh, you got to be gender.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, fair enough. So that's team. All right. So if I was to go back to the statement you made, it's quick wins
Quick wins.
and
mixed with the heavy boulders.
and do a good job of. I think at the end of this session, I think all of us are going to become marketing experts, right? I mean, we're all getting into focusing on how do you make sure you are promoting what you're doing very well and ensuring that people get the message. I mean, that's, you know,
But Ram, it is with the intent to keep the mindset of your team
aligned.
up. And that's
Yeah,
exactly what
fair.
Scott's been telling us, right?
Fair.
Keep talking and keep projecting what you've been doing. So people do their best.
Fair point. We have, you know, I think it's time for a quick poll, isn't it?
Okay.
So why don't we
Time for a poll.
actually, you know, ask the question number 2, and I have got myself the question here. And well, I'm going to read out the question for everyone. The most common error that can inflate the cost of a large-scale payments code transformation the most will be A, incorrect sequencing of the transformation journey, going back to your pebbles and boulders story, suboptimal utilization of existing technology assets, so you are reinventing the wheel, driving a big bang approach as against an agile sprint, going back to the point you made, Teresa, or the inability to leverage synergistic benefits across partners. So what would you think is the most common error? The question is not what's the most damaging cost proposition. The question is what do people most commonly make as an error? The mistake that people do tends to be which of these 4? Again, it can't be all of the above. So I'll repeat, is it incorrect sequencing of the journey? Is it suboptimal utilization of the existing assets? Is it about approaching into the big bang orientation and not an agile approach? Or is it the inability to successfully or effectively leverage synergistic benefits of partners? We do have another 30 seconds for our audience to poll, but if I may ask my fellow panelists here, what would your pick be?
I guess I'll go first, as much as Teresa picked on me for saying the word scope when I should have said managing backlog. to get my verbiage correct. I have been doing this for 30 years, so I slip occasionally. But to me, just having done multiple, whether it's in the payments industry or some of the other industries I played in, to me, it's currently C, right? Because you got to know when to stop, right? Because every transformation program is not a success, right? And the problem with the big bangs is you just keep spending and spending. You get some cost fallacy. We spent so much, you might as well move on, versus going down an agile approach and finding out, hey, this isn't working, I can stop, or I can adjust, right? Or I can do that. So I think, over the course of multiple, clearly it's agile over big bang. Sometimes with the big bang, you may get to total value quicker. You can truly focus and everything else, but I think that's in my minority of cases. It generally requires tremendous focus from both business and IT, and tends to be the only thing the company's doing for a short period of time. So I think the factors to make that successful are just very, very unique.
Love it.
So that'd be my answer.
So you pick big. The most common error people do is choose big bang, and that could actually cost them a lot more than what they anticipate. What would your pick be, Teresa?
I agree, because I wouldn't I, about big bang against agile, but just a couple of words on option 2, if I may. Suboptimal utilization of existing technology assets. And I say this because I'm not in the technology field, right? But as a business lead, sometimes, you'll look at a budget and you'll think, well, we've done that over there, but haven't we got that already? Haven't we got something that does that? And clearly you get to the nitty gritty and it's like, well, it kind of does 80% of it, Teresa, not 100, and therefore, we can replace it or whatever. But sometimes just, whilst I'm voting for number 3, number 2 sometimes is in the back of my head.
If we aren't leveraging existing assets. Interesting, and I think you had alluded to that, Ravi, in your earlier comment, leveraging what we have. And what would your pick be?
See, for me, it's a no-brainer. We have to have the fail fast attitude. Big bang in any transformation in any industry today is out of the window. And Scott is absolutely right. People keep spending a lot of money before they really feel the impact. A lot of money has been spent. So that's something I would pick. But then I also have seen people, as Teresa rightly said, they will have two systems doing very similar things, but each market will want them in their own variation. And as IT provider, my take is you should allow both to coexist, because IT is a enabling function which defines the business or helps the business to accelerate and do better. So you may have two things doing similar things, but you should have a smarter system behind it to manage the two.
Got it.
Gone are the days saying that one size fits all. Never. And I think at FleetCor we see that because of the vast scope. But then generally what we see in the industry is that nowadays people are using horses for courses by region, by geo, by category of business, because the objective is to maximize the value. It's not maximizing revenue, it is maximization of value.
Well said, Ravi. And I think we'll really see what our audience have to say. And before I went there, there you have the answers. We have an overwhelming 38% voted along with you guys to say Big Bang is the most common error that people make. Looks like many of them have learned it the hard way too. And also followed by what could be an incorrect sequencing of a transformation journey that follows that, right? So I guess that's an audience view, and I do see some hands being raised here, some questions. I see Dhanasegaran Ranganathan has raised his hand. For those of you in the audience who actually want to pose questions, you will find on your screen a Q&A button. You could pretty much go there and pose your question, and I'll do my best to pass them on to the panelists here. And maybe there are already a couple of questions and I'm going to ask them. Please feel free to actually quote your name. I prefer it when it's with the name not anonymous. And there's a question for you here, Scott. And the question is, what do you think is more important? Is it the speed or is it the operating costs?
Speed or the operating cost? I'll probably change that and say it's the come back to our value. It's a value statement. So, if you can move quicker and spend more but get to value quicker, that's not a bad thing, right? So I think it's more, how do you focus on the value? The operating cost is only, as a CIO, you're always looking at your operating costs. What's the burn rate of my teams and everything else, because that can be challenging if you're not seeing the value. And I think it goes back to something we talked about earlier, is how do you get the confidence in your team to deliver value? When I say your team, it's your business partners, it's your IT folks, or your technology team coming together. If once you start to get that early confidence that you can get small wins and build to bigger wins, then you tend to do, as I say, pour gasoline on the fire. You're comfortable with spending extra because you have confidence in that team. So I don't tend to start really big, really quick. I tend to build up the momentum just to get my own confidence before I start the operating cost.
Interesting. And there's another one for you as well. And this one is I guess a tricky one. It says, look, FleetCor obviously has acquired several companies over the years. So how do you identify what's the best of breed, and how do you ensure that you're getting them integrated into your system?
Yeah, I'd say, so they're talking about acquisitions, and we really do probably, I'll bucket our acquisitions into three different categories. The first is where we acquire, we call it tuck-in, but essentially a book of business that fits well with something we already run in a given geography. In those cases, that is about, hey, how do we get them over to, our platforms, right, and reduce operating costs so we can maximize the benefit of that acquisition. Those are hard in and of themselves, right? Any of those integration projects, because you get not only all the technology challenges, the cultural challenges, and everything else, but that's one type. We do other types of acquisitions, which are what we call capability, where we look at hey, we have a portfolio of product product, so we want to augment it in that space. We've been doing a lot of that in the accounts payables and spend management perspective, in which case, there we have an integration problem. It's more of a technical integration problem because we want to keep the technology, we want to integrate it with what we already have and be able to offer that to our customers, right, as additional ones. And the third type of acquisition we do tends to be more geographic, and those ones get difficult. So if we're operating in the US, we say, hey, here, let's go do something in Europe, and they have a different technology base. Sometimes you get too arrogant, especially Americans sometimes, and hey, we'll just take what we have in the States and put it in Europe. And you don't recognize all the differences, whether they be legislative, whether they be cultural, right? Whether it be the fact that you're dealing with multiple countries and the taxation. So sometimes there we don't necessarily just say, hey, let's put them on our systems. We'll actually let that technology reside in there and really focus on growing the business. So long-winded answer to a simple question.
No, but and I think that would pretty much be true. I'm sure there are many people in the audience who actually are in the middle of a very similar situation, right? And I think that's a very insightful input for them to keep in mind. Now, we would, not let the audience just keep asking us questions. I think it's time for them to answer a few questions. So I'm going to go on the next poll, which is I am launching question number 3, which is going to be the, let's say, a more relatively difficult question. What would you call as the primary success factor that's critical to ensure in a payments core transformation program? So what is the most critical success factor for a payments core transformation? And you have 4 choices. As usual, all of the above is not one of them. The first is clarity of vision and the definition of a target end state. The second option is strong, effective, immersive governance. The third is staying relevant to the changing market demands. And fourth is adoption of appropriate and, should I say, contemporary technology platforms. So you really have a tough one there, I'm assuming. Is it the clarity of vision and definition of target end state? Is it the strong, effective, immersive governance? Is it about staying relevant to the changing market demands? Or is it about the adoption of appropriate technology platform? And what we're seeking here, we recognize that all of them are success factors. The question is, what's the primary success factor of these 4? So Ravi, what would your pick be?
So while I'm tempted to go for clarity of vision, but if I put my realist hat on, it is basically the third option, which is staying relevant. Because you might have a great transformation program which is deemed as a success, but if it is not relevant to the business and it's not contemporary, it's completely useless. So I'll go with option C.
Okay, Teresa?
Ravi, I agree with what you've said there regarding sort of clarity of vision and changing market demands. However, I'm going for option 2 because I am big on governance. I'm a very boring woman, but immersive and effective governance for me really encapsulates the other things on those answers, right? Because if you have strong and effective governance, all of those other things, to my mind, should appear at steering committees and other governance functions.
So you already have 2 divergent views in the panel, and what would yours be?
They keep swaying me. Very convincing panelists. And it's funny oftentimes when I hear the word governance, it kind of gets me back to, oh wait, that's waterfall or steering committee meetings and all of that. But maybe it's just the following the agile ceremonies very stringently and coming back and bringing that up. So maybe Teresa swayed me that the governance will make sure you have the clarity of vision because it'll call out, hey, we don't know what we're doing, right? But I'll give you my initial thought. My initial thought was 1, which was clarity of vision, right? Because I think it's a guardrails. Then what was number 4?
Number 4 was adopting appropriate technology.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the adopting the appropriate technologies. I think a lot of times, back to the multi-vendor areas and everything else, people will rush into just based on a vendor they're working in, down a path, right, which will get them stuck in a corner. So, or you'll have biases with inside technology. So really stepping back around some of those key architectural decisions that, you know, align with your value statements to say, okay, this one's going to give me the most flexibility, can be critical. And that's the balancing someone else asked too is, hey, the right architectural decision might have more upfront costs and take longer versus, hey, I can spend less and get moving quicker. Those are all difficult decisions. So you got to make sure you don't put yourself in a corner with some of those.
Well, I guess I'm just looking at what the results of the poll are. And the majority of audience seems to actually think along the lines of what Ravi said. And it's about staying relevant to the changing market demands. I guess it's, as I said, none of them actually are not a success factor. Each one of them is indeed a success or a failure factor. But I guess it's also about what, is you have experienced and maybe once or twice bitten that you are, as many times shy or more. So if I was to then go back and take these questions and take this point that everyone seems to vote very high about staying relevant to the changing market demands. And I really want to go around the panel in interpreting that question, right? I mean, because that's actually, again, it's different perspectives for different people. Staying relevant to a market demand, and if you were to actually maybe share an experience or two, Scott, on how that, you've seen that actually happen and or doing it either the right way or the wrong way, and you want to share something.
No, I think the easiest one, at least for us in the most near term, was just the huge shift in digital, right, during the pandemic, right? When you look at, hey, we had done a capital budget, we had allocated things everywhere, but we were fortunate, we were iterative enough in terms of how we looked at our overall capital budget that we had to move very quickly, not just for the, hey, go enable everyone from work to work from home. That was relatively, that was more of a change management adoption thing. I'm making sure people could use the technology than it was any big work we had to do. The vendors were out there. Okay, we had the network. How do you get people there? It was the shift on working with the business. We can't sell like we used to sell, right? And how do we very quickly adjust and change? We had a digital strategy. Here's what we're going to do with digital. We had to change that, right, based on what the needs were. Or we had a go to market on the product strategy. We had to shift over to the digital side, right? So I'd say that was one where we stayed. We were starting a transformation from a quote unquote digital, but really the shift in the pandemic helped us. We had to drive and change within there and say, okay, where can we?
And this is a classic example of what Ravi was quoting as changing engines in a moving car.
Yeah, that was one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's not just about doing incremental change, but transformational change.
That one felt like changing a moving car while someone's shooting at you.
That's a good one.
Everything else, wearing a mask, it was a bit of a challenge.
Lovely. So we do have some, the last 10 minutes, we are opening up for audience to ask questions to our panelists, and we do have a few questions here. I'm going to start with a question from Sagar Kumar. And Sagar's question is, you answered a bit on the speed versus operating cost, but here's a follow-up. How do you see the build versus buy conundrum? And how do you see that impacting the results of the 10x faster, but ends up compromising on the 4x cheaper objective? You want to go with that, Ravi, first?
Sure. So it's a very good question. Thank you for asking, Sagar. So when you look at build versus buy, right? Not necessarily buy is costlier. The build could also be costly. So it depends on the situation and the context. So you need to understand your context and understand the vision that you're going towards. As we've been saying consistently in this session, is that look at your vision, keep reiterating. So using that as the anchor and the driver, if you look at the build versus buy, then things will fall in place. Yes, sometimes it's not 4x cheaper, but then the value could be multiple times more. So you've got to map it with value as well. So when you say 4x, it's not directly translating to money. It's also translating to value.
I'll pause you there for a second, Ravi, and I think this was also when we had this topic, shared on the social media, there were a few people who actually reached out to me saying, look, what's this discussion about? I mean, is it you have speed and you have costs, right? And you rightly said, cost generally is about not about money alone or revenue alone, it's about value. But I want to take you to the other aspect, which is about speed, right? And since we talked about moving trains and shooting guns, and here is relativity. So is speed, it's 10x faster as compared to what? Is it compared to what you ought to have done? Or is it compared to what others are doing? Or is it, what's the regular path vis-a-vis what you do on an accelerated mode? How do you, in your view, qualify the faster? What's the relative element out there?
So 10x faster is in comparison, in my view, is through the linear thinking and the traditional thinking. Like, for example, I have this legacy landscape, I have to lift and shift it to the new one, and that would be the linear thinking. But there's a faster way to reach there, keeping the value that I have to deliver in mind, or we have to deliver as a team in mind. That would be the 10x faster path. That's what I would keep it simple there. Like, while there are n theories around it, when you get down to reality, it just boils down to this.
So you actually are taking not an arithmetic progression, but a geometric progression, where you are actually having multiple factors at play, and you are actually taking it to the power of. Not. I think that's a very fair comment, and I guess a lot of us don't realize that it's not about doing the same thing differently. It's about doing different things as well, right? So I think that's in essence what you're saying. But if I was to take another question here, and this is. And I guess this question is to all panelists. In the process of transformation or integration, as the case may be, and it is, if there is a program that comes along the way which is not part of your core transformation agenda, and you are in the middle of that big transformation journey, so what do? Do you retain your program as it is, or you assimilate it into your roadmap? Or you take it as a separate piecemeal activity? What's the default approach you would recommend, or you've experienced or adopted in the past?
To me, I guess.
You may start with it.
I mean, it's a hard question for me, just because we, FleetCor, we're sit overside 6 different lines of businesses. So I'm used to constantly from a mindset shifting from program to program, because inside those but if I were to say inside an individual line of business, I think of it from that perspective. I think it goes back to the focus and clarity we talked about, right? If you truly believe it's going to start to diverge the people's thoughts, you really do have to prioritize. And, we're going to come back to the value statement. It's like managing any backlog, right? It's just a bigger backlog, right? The programs, right? So I don't think there's a cut and dry answer, right? If it's, the quote unquote, it can be assimilated, meaning, hey, it's an add-on value statement to something already done. You just prioritize what's inside the backlog of what you're doing. If it's truly a new program, new initiative that's going to be divergent from everyone else, it doesn't add as much value, but yes, it does add value. I think you have to make the tough decision, say, no, let's continue on and put that in our backlog.
And how do you communicate tough decisions to those impacted stakeholders?
Well, oftentimes it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be necessarily the CM is going to have to, they're going to facilitate the process, but I'm going to be going hand in hand with my line of business president, right? Those decisions come out and we come back and say, yeah, this is the right decision, back to the teams, right? So
it's a collective decision.
Yeah, it's got to be.
And the guiding principle in driving these collective decisions is the commitment to the original value proposition
well, if it's still there, as we mentioned before, Teresa brought up and we talked about the reevaluating. Is it still relevant, right? Is this new idea better? Hey, is there an easy way to, hey, we've captured this amount of value on the existing one, we can soft land it. So you have to go through all the different scenarios.
And that's very useful, Scott. And I think I'm sure the audience is finding a lot of value in that statement. And I'm just connecting the dots here, Teresa. And if I go back to this quote you made about voice of customer, I see your hand up. Did you want to say something?
I did. I'm sorry. It was just building on your previous question and what Ravi and Scott said.
Yes.
There is something I recognise. There's something that comes in from seemingly sometimes from left field that kind of, you have to call it for transformation. Nice phrase, wasn't it? And comes from a transformation program. And for me, it depends on what it is. If it's regulatory or competitive, then I think we need to stop and think about it. Regulatory is a no-brainer, really, isn't it? But if it's competitive, if one of our competitors has launched something and suddenly we're hemorrhaging a lot of money and revenue and future revenue as well, then I think that brings a different dimension to the discussion. And I think back to the previous poll question, an effective steering committee would bottom that out as well.
Well, you made two statements there. One is about the governance part, but second interesting part is measuring value is not about what's incremental revenue, it's also about what's the opportunity cost, right? So if you aren't doing it, and what are you losing, and therefore how do you make sure that that's brought into the equation before you made a decision, right? I think that's what you're making. But I was going to ask you something else, Teresa. I was going to ask you, look, in this process of determining priorities, right? There is this factor of the voice of customer, which you have always been strongly advocating, right? In fact, I recall there are board meetings in some of my, my clients actually have an empty chair that actually has the name customer written there. So everybody in the room, don't forget that we're doing this all for the customer there, right? So the question really is that, are there, experiences you want to share on how do you keep the relevance of the voice of customer or the customer's need in making those decisions on priorities? Some of them may be fait accompli. I mean, regulatory constraint may be standard, right? But when you have these, alternatives that are both compelling, how does the customer factor play a role in throwing its weight?
There's a couple of things. I've been involved in processes like the one you described with, customer written on the chair. And I find that in early days of the project, that's effective. But after a while, you kind of just can't, people seem to just assimilate to that chair and not ignore it, but it's not as strong. So for me, I always, if you can bring a live customer in, as opposed to a dead one, that sounds strange, didn't it? But if you can bring a customer in to talk about why it is important to them and what benefit it will bring and what business it will retain for your organization, that's incredibly useful. Also having ongoing customer focus groups or customer advisory boards as well, in my experience, have been very, very useful. I used to run the Global Client Advisory Board program for RBS for many of our international products. And that was so powerful because frankly, when you come to those prioritization debates, and if you say, this multinational conglomerate over here really needs it, and so does that one over here, regardless of which geographical region they're from, that's incredibly powerful. And that's why we're there. That's why we're there, to serve customers. So for me, they're really useful tools.
So the customer view is seen with the context, and it's not just seen in isolation, is the point you're making. So you got to have the larger context in place. And that actually, I would bring a question here that is correlating to what you just said, right? And this is from Swaroop Varadarajan. And Swaroop's question is, with the constant change in consumer requirements, how does one ensure the transformation agenda is in line with the consumer journey? So this is actually turning the whole thing on its head, right? I mean, you had a certain customer expectation, you designed the customer transformation journey, but the customer's requirements are changing. They are in a dynamic mode, they are in a flux. So, and how do you keep pace with your transformation, in alignment with the consumer's journey? Would you want to go with that?
No, that was a super hard question. I was hoping you'd go somewhere else. I think it's hard to come back with, it's a general question and it sometimes can be very contextual.
Yes.
Right. So it's hard to give a, one size fits all answer. We're probably going to repeat ourselves around, hey, Teresa's point on make sure you have the voice of the customer at every meeting, right?
Right.
That's how it, and with Agile, you're going to constantly be making small changes. It's not like, hey, we got to, the end of Q3 and we got this customer poll and oh my gosh, look, everything's changed, right? I don't think you come there, right? So I think if you find yourself on, hey, we're way out of line with where the customer is, it's probably symptomatic of problems in your process, is what I would say.
Got it.
Right. That's how I would say it.
I mean, people in the treasury front will understand this. I mean, this whole concept of mark to market is where you constantly peg your value with the other market. Is A, to ensure where you are vis-a-vis the market, and B, you aren't left far behind. If you aren't marking yourself to market periodically, then you kind
Should
of
never find a big gap.
Yeah. So I guess the same logic is what you're talking about. So in every meeting you have, you actually constantly peg yourself against where the market is and what the expectations, customers' needs are, and validate it, right? I've already run past the deadline, but there is one interesting observation of Apuv Dongre, and this is in context of Sagar's earlier question of build versus buy. And Ravi, I think I would like to know if you concur with Apuv. He says build is what gives you a competitive advantage, something that you may want to control and take quickly to your customer. And buy is something that is generally standard in the industry. So you choose build when you want to have it unique, and you go buy when you actually are willing to take, when you are looking for speed, and therefore it is ready to actually implement. Do you agree?
Not really. Actually, it is extremely contextual. Like, what is the value that the customer or the business is trying to derive? So just because you want to move fast, you should not be, having a predetermined approach. You should fit it. You should fit it right to the customer's goal and the end state. So build versus buy is just a journey. Now, it could be right or wrong depending on the context. So while 10x faster, 4x cheaper is very, very important, that doesn't mean that you will compromise on the goal and the value and the vision.
Perfect.
So I think we should stick to the basics, while build versus buy is an accelerating tool, which will be applicable in specific circumstances.
But I think the larger objective of what you're doing, why you are doing what you're doing, going back to Teresa's statement,
Exactly.
Takes prominence in making any of these decisions. I guess that's the Northern Star that you actually always look up to, right? I mean, keep aligning yourself to the reason why you're there in the first place, and then figure. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end, and I'm 3 minutes past the deadline. I still see some questions being posed, but I'm unfortunately compelled to actually bring this session to a close. May I thank my fellow panelists, Teresa, Scott, Ravi. Wonderful chatting with you. It was very interesting, and I will remember for a long time that the guy was shooting the moving train. So thank you all the people in the audience there, and appreciate your participation, and have a wonderful day ahead.